In 2015, the United States Supreme Court issued its landmark decision, Obergefell versus Hodges, which overturned the restrictions many states had in place on same-sex marriage. This meant that in states such as Texas, states could no longer ban same-sex marriage. Well, in a time of incredible uncertainty, as the U.S. Supreme Court is overturning prior decisions, this leaves a lot of families uncertain about what their future is. And so today, my guest is Lorie Burch. She's the owner and founder of Burch Law, where she focuses on estate planning and probate issues. And she's also very involved with the LGBT community and is here today to talk with us about what these uncertainties mean for same-sex families, as well as families that have children who are gay and lesbian as well. So I want to thank you for being here today, Lorie, as we have this conversation.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
So let's just sort of start today and talk about what the landscape of laws looks like for families of LGBTQ people.
Yeah, definitely. And, in light of the recent election, there's a lot more concern about what this could mean for particularly the LGBTQ community, whether it is families, individuals, or parents of LGBTQ kids. And the way that I've been talking about this lately is it's really hard. I mean, you might enjoy the nuance of discussing what could happen, but we really just don't know. We don't. It is a time of uncertainty, and that can be very debilitating. And so what I always try to do is to focus on what we do know and what you can control. And I want to be very careful in which types of law we're talking about. So when it comes to my lane, which is considered estate planning, although a lot of people's eyes get glazed over and think, well, I don't have an estate. Or our favorite thing is, well, we'll get someone who says, I need a will, but I don't need an estate plan. And I'm like, who chose these titles for practice areas?
Right.
I mean, a lot of people think it's family law, which I, tease some of my family law colleagues. Well, what we do is a lot more about families than, divorce and child custody battles, but that's fine. You guys can have that title if you want. But estate planning essentially is really wills, trusts, powers of attorney, probate, guardianship for kids, planning for death, disability, hospitalization, and making sure that the right people can make decisions for you and make decisions for your children if you have any. And so we can control that. We can always control that. And something that I want to make sure, and I've been saying this for the 20 years I've been in practice, is for the LGBTQ community in particular, there is nothing special we're having to do. This is something every adult should be doing, is putting these things in place, making sure that you have them, making sure that you're doing it the right way. And that means not the DIY, not the reduced legal services. I mean, we untangle those issues constantly, is to go and find a qualified law firm, and particularly for this community, ones that have experience, because there are some special considerations that I know that we're going to talk about, but it's not necessarily there's something different that you need to do. It's really the consequences of not having it. And if we do end up losing marriage equality, you will not lose the ability to choose who you want to make medical decisions, to choose who you want to take care of your kids, to choose who you want to inherit property and assets and money that you have. So having this planning is just as vital and important now as it has always been.
One of the things that occurs to me as I hear you talk is that the thing about marriage equality is that marriage puts a default plan in place. So if you failed to take the steps that you should have taken anyway, right? To do all the designations, there's at least some rights and a default plan in place.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Yes. And so that's the thing. Consequences of not having it is different. However, it is still such a problem. Like one of the biggest things that it blows people's minds in Texas is that we don't have, speaking to another lawyer, joint tenancy for real estate. What does that mean to you all? That means we don't have this type of ownership where if you own a home with someone, that if one of you passes away, it automatically goes to the survivor. And in fact, because we're also a community property state, which we could have a whole episode of us going back and forth about community property and how fun that is when it comes to estate planning and family law. But it doesn't necessarily even go to your spouse. spouse. If you have children that where you're both not the legal parent, then your community property interest in your home and other assets would go to them. And so there are a lot of things, even for legally married couples, when they don't have a plan in place and when they haven't done it properly, they're still scratching their heads. Or even just the simple scenario, and this is something we frankly get a lot, is when these documents have to be implemented. This is when people are grieving. This is when people are going through a loss. This is when they are not at their best, their most rational. And we have people who they just want to be able to sell their husband's car because it's too hard to look at. And so now you're telling me that I have to wait 9 months, go to a court, get two people who knew my husband to say that he knew him, that he was married to me. And the reality is that, yes, this plays out all of the time. So there are some default laws for marriage. I mean, marriage is important, but it doesn't necessarily do a whole lot in the estate planning world, frankly. It's really more when it comes to other benefits, which are tremendous. And I mean, even tax laws, which can be argued whether it's a benefit or not, but being able to be put on health insurance, have, that be benefits being tax-free in that regard, veterans benefits, immigration, like it touches on a lot of things. It is important. And also it is a fundamental equality issue. If one of my favorite things that I get the minute that the Windsor case came down, then the Obergefell, and then the Roe overturn, and then the election, is people will reach out to me and say, should we get married? So of course I say no. No, I don't say that. I'm just like, who am I to tell you whether you should get married or not? Right. I get what they're saying. I'm like, let's walk through what comes and what doesn't come with that. But the point is, get married if you want to get married. And I'm going to tread lightly on this. And yes, there is. We don't know, but everything's on the table to lose. So if you really, really want to get married, then I guess you probably should do it sooner than later. But by no means does that, even if you're unmarried, and it's just as important there that you can still do wills, trusts, guardianship, powers of attorney. You can still do that whether you're married or not. There is no requirement in Texas law that they have to have any sort of legal or familial relationship to you to be able to name them to make these decisions or to inherit assets. Now, when it comes to adoption, which I hope we get into because this is a very hot issue for the LGBTQ community, there are some things I would say you might want to get this done as soon as possible. But in the area of wills, trusts, estate planning, it is just as important regardless of whether you have default marriage laws to fall back on or not.
Okay. And so let's touch first on what those documents are that everybody should have in place.
Yeah. So something that has really evolved over time with my practice, and I've seen it among other colleagues as well, is a will-based plan or a living trust-based plan. And I don't want to get too convoluted. There are hundreds of types of trust, but basically this boils down to two different types of strategies. One thing that people need to understand is having a will. It's important. If you don't have a will, the state of Texas has one for you.
Right.
That has been my mantra for 20 plus years. So a will is important, but it still has to go through probate court. So when people call us and say, my mom passed away, I'm the executor, she has a will, we don't say it this way to them, but it's basically, no, you don't have a will until a judge says you do. And no, you're not the executor until a judge says you can be. And so a will is important because it does speed up the process. It does reduce the costs, and it does have your wishes outlined, but it's still a public record. It still does have some expense, and it still has some time delays to it. So what we're starting to see is courts are getting plugged up and delayed. And so a lot more people are transitioning to a living trust plan where it says all the same stuff a will does, who gets what and who's doing that. But when you create this trust and connect assets to it that you can still control, when you pass away, it doesn't have to go through probate. So I want to create that nuance, because for the LGBTQ community or families who have potentially trans or non-binary kids, that they don't want it to be a public record, because a will is a public record. Assets through a will can be a public record, that a living trust might be a way to create that privacy and protection, and can even help stave off any sort of will contest from families. So that is something that's very important to make sure that people are considering. And yes, trust can be more work and more time and more expense. But if you like ROI, like I know you and I do, return on investment, this is something that's going to save a lot of time, money, and heartache later. So that's a piece. But let me just run run through the other basics that people should have. We in Texas have a directive to physicians. This is our living will. Do you or do you not want your life artificially prolonged? We should have a medical power of attorney who can make emergency medical decisions for us. That needs to be accompanied by a HIPAA medical record release to make sure that those people will have access to information to make those decisions. That might be nice. Financial power of attorney. So if you're hospitalized in an accident, who can step in, pay bills, contact banks, handle money and property. We also do a declaration of guardian in case, heaven forbid, you ever need to have a guardian appointed for you. You can pre-designate to make that process better and to prevent other people from coming in. And then I think the best title document in all of estate planning, appointment of agent to control disposition of remains. And one thing I love about it is how many other legal documents do you know where the title tells you exactly what it does, right?
Right.
So, but this is I've actually had this come up early in my practice with same-sex couples where family members were trying to control cremation, burial, and all of that. So very important to have. And then the last one that we do, because if you did a Venn diagram about the type of clients we work with, you've got families with young kids and LGBTQ, and then you got a huge intersection. So we really do deal a lot with families with young kids. So we, by default, do this designation of healthcare agent for children because guardianship will address if you pass away, who takes care of them. But what if, they're in the care of their grandparents, or you're on vacation and you've left them, you need to be able to designate who can make emergency medical decisions if you as a parent aren't able to do so. So that's a broad brush of just what we would consider the plan. There's a lot of other pieces that come with that, but those would be the actual documents that we start off with.
So I just want to back up for a little bit because I know so much of this is so confusing, and I think it's really good to kind of break down the basics. A living will is different from a living trust.
If anything, it's worth going to a qualified law firm to help you figure out terminology, because even the medical power of attorney can be a healthcare proxy, power of attorney for healthcare. I mean, it's just all these different titles. But yes, so living will, we always have to discern we need to ask what's the result you're looking for, because a lot of times when people say living will, they mean a living trust. Whereas a living will, which is really a silly term for this document, I don't really know who came up with it, but this is the advance directive or directive, however it's called in various jurisdictions. But it's the document it's the Terry Schiavo document, right? It is, do you or do you not want your life artificially prolonged if it is determined that you are in an irreversible or persistent vegetative state? That is, in the legal world, what a living will would be.
Exactly. And then a living trust. But a living trust is different than other types of trusts. So can you just touch a little bit on when do you have a living trust versus an irrevocable trust versus insurance trust?
Right.
I mean, it gets very complicated.
There are hundreds of types of trusts. They boil down to two main types, living and what's called testamentary. But living is you create it right now. It's a trust that exists right now. Testamentary just means that it's a trust that gets created upon your death. So again, I told you we deal a lot with family with young kids. So for me, if I pass away, I don't want everything to go to my 5-year-old. She legally cannot inherit it, although I do think she could handle it, frankly. But she cannot inherit it. So what I would say is, hey, if my 5-year-old is under the age I pick, so let's say 25, then create a trust for her. Sister is trustee. This is how to distribute it. When she hits 25, distribute it to her. The great thing is your parents can choose any ages, or maybe it's when they graduate from college, or this, that, or the other, but you pick that. But my point is that's a trust that kicks in after death. And if you're following along, I hope never kicks in, right? So it's not one that gets created. It's not a living trust. So they boil down to those main types. So a lot of people have both. They might have a living trust while they're alive to control their assets, but then upon their death, their living trust says, hey, create this other trust for my spouse, my kids, my favorite niece, whatever the case may be. Now, irrevocable and revocable, I wouldn't go down that road. There's a lot of misleading information. I would tell everybody just consult with a qualified firm on this, because 99% of the time what they mean to say, even if they say irrevocable, is a revocable living trust. Because the revocable piece means that you can adjust it, change it all you want, just like you could a will. It also means you can revoke it. How about that? You can amend it. It also means it's not a separate entity. So it's just you. So if I put my house into my revocable living trust, that's still me. I can sell it. There's no problem with the mortgage or the homestead exemption. Whereas if I created an irrevocable trust, which is a separate entity like an LLC, separate tax ID, separate tax consequences, that's a whole nother road to go down. There are uses for that. But for the vast majority of people, when we're talking about a trust plan versus a will plan, what is meant by that is a revocable living trust, a trust that can be changed and adjusted, and it exists right now.
And you still have control over the assets.
Yes.
I think so many people think trust, I don't want to give up control. And so that's why I think it's important to kind of.
It is important. And there's some people, we deal with clients that just still can't wrap their head around it. And it's like, look, the best thing we can do is at least have something. And a will done by a quality firm is still far ahead. It's more than what 70% of adults have. So might as well walk away with that.
And when you say DIY, I just want to be clear. What we're talking about are all of these programs out there that for low cost, you can go in and draft these documents, right?
Well, even now with AI, I mean, we've had people show us legal generated documents from ChatGPT. And look, here's the thing. A couple of things is one, I have never and will never consider myself a document preparer. You know, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is, and we'll get to that because their stuff is really bad too, but let's just pretend all things being equal, the documents and the wording itself are correct and that they're signed correctly. Wait till I get to that. But who's telling you how your beneficiary should be set up on your life insurance? Because guess what? You should not name your 6-year-old as a beneficiary there. Who's telling you how your bank accounts should be set up? We have a supplemental plan called the CYA plan, Cover Your Assets plan. And that's for extended service, where basically we have people ask the question or answer the question, if you died today, would your family know what to do and know where to start? And I tell them, you can't fool me. After doing this for almost 20 years, I know the answer is no. Even if you've got the best legal documents, do they know your smartphone code? Do they know your usernames, your passwords, who to contact? Who are your streaming services that need to be contacted? And the list goes on and on. And so I started my practice in the wake of losing my beloved stepdad, and that was a coincidence, but it really set a tone for trying to see through the eyes of what people go through. Yeah. And it's not just the legal documents. But let me take just a quick second because this stuff is terrible. First and foremost, the craziest thing with the DIY, do-it-yourself, or even reduced legal services where they generate documents and give them to you, 9 times out of 10, all right, maybe 8 times out of 10, they are not signed correctly. Mm-hmm. And I've got really fun examples, and it would blow people's minds to show it to them. My favorite, most recent one, because it happens all the time, is we see the instructions that were sent, and we think the instructions are really good. Like, get the notary, get the witnesses, sign here, sign there. We think the instructions are good. So then we're looking at this, and you get to the witness section, and it says NA. But they initialed it, that they're ignoring. And I'm like thinking, how are we losing people with this? So basically, the majority of the time, they're not even valid. They won't work. So it's definitely not even worth it then. But then we've had people lose homestead exemptions. We've had people exclude their spouses with doing this because they presume the spouse automatically gets things. Mm-hmm. So it'll say, if I pass away, I give everything to my kids. And it's like, you cut your spouse out and you don't even realize it. So, I mean, it goes on and on, the lack of quality, but they don't even get signed correctly.
And I think that we bring up such a valid point, because it's not just about the documents. It's about all the things that you need to have in place when somebody passes. I know when I was going through cancer with my mom at the end of her life, it was sort of like a last minute thought that, oh my gosh, we need to get your social media account. So, right, designate those so we have access. Absolutely. And so many things were thought through, but when they're not, when you're in the moments of grief and trying to figure this stuff out and you're getting runarounds from banks. You can't do the basic thing. And the thing, just to be a little selfish about it on behalf of me and my team, is that you're dead. So who do you think your family is getting angry at? It's us. Yeah. Stop doing that to us. We didn't put you in this situation. Your relative did. Your family member did. We didn't do this. Yeah. But and we talk, you've probably heard estate planning talked about as legacy planning. And I think that's a cool thing. But I think a lot of people attach themselves to that concept with one definition of legacy, and that is,
what you may leave behind, the inheritance and so forth. But if you look, and I looked it up, the second definition of legacy is the long-lasting impact of someone's life. And when you look at what people will go through and how your family is going to be able, or not your family, right, be able to figure things out, how are they going to be able to grieve? How are they going to be able to honor you? How are they going to be able to celebrate? Is it going to be through complicated court processes, a lot of expense? We've had families had to fundraise just to be able to sell a house. Is it going to be that? Or is it going to be you put this plan in place, you cared enough about them, and you cared enough about your story? This is the final chapter of your story, and your story is your legacy. And what do you want that to be?
That's exactly right. And too often when you don't have the plan in place, the default is conflict in the family that destroys.
Frankly, even
legacies.
100%. And sometimes you can do the best you can, and it'll still lead to conflict. True. But at least there's something to fall back on. I won't say what family members, but I did have a situation where a family member knew that there was going to be fighting, and so she actually put in this whole mediation clause and how that would work between her two kids.
I love it.
And it came to, I won't say how close of a relationship this is, but it's very close. But it did play out that way, exactly the way she thought. So at least she put in those parameters. But most of the time, it's really just navigating how to sell a house, how to get into a bank account. And oh my gosh, I don't want to disparage banks and title companies, but they're the worst. The stuff that they tell people, I am daily shocked at the misinformation that is given to people. Yeah. And so if you've got, and that's the thing, it's why I'm not worried. I think AI is cool. Like we use it for marketing stuff. I'm not worried as a threat to my profession at all because I've never seen us as document generators. It's really these other pieces to help be an advocate for you, because I can tell you what, you can get the best power of attorney from me, or you can get some crap from the internet, and a bank is just as likely to reject it. Mm-hmm. The difference is if you go to a firm like ours, you're going to feel like, well, gosh, I think that probably should have been correct. And two, let me just call them. And frankly, there's nothing I enjoy more than being snotty to bankers. So, and I have a 100% success rate in getting them to honor these documents. But it just baffles me. I think they just have this automatic thing. We're going to reject it, and we'll see what you got in you to fight. All
right. So far, what we're talking about applies to everybody. I mean, these are documents that we all need to have in place, and this is because death is going to happen.
It is.
I always say as a divorce attorney, all marriages end one way or another, right?
That's right. I got to remember that.
You've got the death side, I've got the divorce side.
Right.
All right. So this has been such a great conversation so far on the documents that we all need to have all the time. We're all going to die. I always say as a divorce attorney, every marriage is going to end, death, divorce. You've got the death side
I
covered.
love that. Yeah.
So now I want to talk about specifically estate planning. What do LGBTQ families need to be paying attention to?
Yeah. So where I would start with that is, and we talked about it with trust, about maybe needing an extra layer of privacy, of insulation from a court or a elected Texas judge from honoring this. And so to me, when I'm giving you the examples of going to a bank and having them rejected, or going to a hospital, we need to keep in mind the reality of, well, what if that is a bank, a hospital, a doctor, a title company, a court that does not believe in your relationship, right? That's an element that straight couples, it doesn't occur to them. So that's a whole element that could happen. So the biggest thing is that, again, the consequences of not having this done and having it done correctly. So imagine not having a properly done medical power of attorney, and you're in a facility where they don't want to honor your relationship, or it personally offends their morals or their religion, and so they feel like they don't have to. And then you've got either you don't have anything, or you've got something from the internet. So again, what we're talking about is in the very real ideal world for that the LGBTQ community navigates is we're not just up against lack of laws of not having documents to enforce the laws. We're also dealing with potential animus on behalf of regular individual people who don't care about, those laws. And you need to make sure you've got everything T's crossed, I's dotted to make sure you are going to honor this. I've done it the right way. And by the way, we've got this firm that's going to back us up and they'll tell you how you're going to honor it. So again, it sounds like we're talking about this in a very general way because you're absolutely right. This is for everybody. Once you're 18, you need to start thinking about having some pieces in place of legal planning so that other people can make decisions for you when you cannot. But when it comes to the LGBT community, there's these added things that you may navigate in the world that you need to make sure that you're able to enforce them and have people advocate for you. And that is why it's so critical to have this done and have it done correctly, not just by a qualified firm, but a firm that understands the unique components. The other thing I want to make sure that I've alluded to it, but particularly when you have parents who have children who may identify as gay, lesbian, non-binary, or trans, you need to be especially mindful of who are these people that you are going to put in charge of making decisions for them. Are we going to make sure that they are going to honor, not use dead names, not disrespect, or in fact, if you don't have anything, the idea, and we talked about this before we started this, the idea that your non-binary child could be put into child protective services if you haven't named a guardian for them. It's, again, all the planning is very similar. It's the consequences of not having this done and not having someone guide you thinking through all of those pieces.
And I'm thinking here as a parent of young adult children. I mean, my 18-year-old is not thinking about their life documents that they need to have in place, right? But as a parent, one of the best things I can do is help begin to acclimate them to the adult responsibilities and the documents that we need to have. So I think having these conversations with your children, especially if you have LGBTQ children. Right?
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I want to make sure that we hit upon, because we do this all the time, and it's usually at graduation time in May or going back to school in August, is we have a lot of parents that once their child turns 18, you no longer have rights to make medical decisions, have access to medical information, even financial or, credit card information. And so we generally recommend that 18 plus kids get a medical power of attorney, a medical record release for HIPAA, and a financial power of attorney. It doesn't mean you have to name your parents. I mean, they still, I don't know why this becomes such a contentious issue online whenever we're promoting this, but it's like they should be able to pick whoever they want. And we're like, that is the point. Yes, but it's usually driven by the parents. But yes, absolutely. Right. And there are some young adults out there who are estranged from their family. So let's make sure you've done this to make sure you've got your best friend, or maybe it's a distant aunt that would have your back. And so it is important to make sure that those things are put in place. And, we're kind of a different sort of law firm. We're more laid back, not very stodgy. And so, some of these 18, 19-year-olds that come in, I'm like, what do you think about having your own attorney at your age? Do your other friends do? They're like, yeah, actually, it's kind of cool.
That's great. And so important. So, when we started off talking about sort of the changes in law that happened in 2015, and now this sense of uncertainty, what are the big fears? And, how do you address those? What do you tell people?
I think, one thing I want to make sure that we address is that when it comes to children, and depending on how you've brought children into the world, and there's a lot of different ways that LGBTQ families can do that you need to make sure that you're doing what you need to do to make sure that both parents have recognized legal rights. And it's very different state to state. And we do right now, you can do a second parent adoption. This is your domain, not mine, but you can do a second parent adoption in Texas. And so if you are dragging your feet on whether to go through the time and money of doing this, I would say get that done now, because we could be this far away from an executive order from our governor saying, don't grant those anymore. And so I would encourage that being done, because one of the biggest misperceptions I've seen since Obergefell among our community is being named on a birth certificate does not give you parental rights per se. And so if you've got a female couple, for example, where one is giving birth and the other one, by virtue of marriage, is being put on that birth certificate. And that's important and significant, but it's also mostly ceremonial. It might be when you're, going to the doctor's office or enrolling them in school, that can help. But fact of the matter is, in Texas, to be a mother in this example, you either need to have given birth or have done adopted or had some court adjudication. So basically that, in this scenario, woman named on the birth certificate who's not the birth mom is not a legal parent. That is one scenario where this second parent adoption can come into play. And it's very, very significant. So things like that, you're talking about fears that are out there. There is a lot of fear of the unknown. And so that's why, are we going to lose marriage? Should we move out of the state? Should we move out of the country? And those are all valid concerns. And I feel like you need to do what you feel is right. As far as me and my family, we're going to stay here and you're going to have to recognize us and know that we exist. We're not going anywhere. This is how it felt when I started my practice in 2005. And so I think we need all of the above, but you've got to react to the unknown however you want. But coming back to what are some of the things that you can do, these are some of the things that you can do. Outside of that too, one anecdote I would give you is that when I went to law school, in DC at George Washington, and I had a fellowship, a legal fellowship at People for the American Way, which is a civil rights and liberties organization. And I remember being very inspired sitting in the conference room. There were all these black and white pictures of the civil rights movement. And I just loved sitting in there. And so when I had my own practice, and you should come visit me in my office. In one of our conference rooms, we have a women's suffrage black and white print. We have the March on Selma. We have the Human Rights Campaign and stand on the right side of history. We have the Supreme Court with a rainbow flag in front of it. And I like to do that because it reminds me that there's all these struggles that we have gone through and we continue to go through, including, and maybe especially right now, but it tells me fundamentally we can do hard things. Mm-hmm. And that we can be vigilant, we can do these things, and we, at least for me, this is my 2 cents, never ever lose hope.
I love that. I love to end podcasts with asking, what is your message for hope? Your message of hope for families right now. And I think with so much going on, this is such a strong message of, we need to continue, stay, right. So one of the things that came up that I was thinking about was, I know a lot of people through like the musical theater world and the artistic world who are saying, I'm not coming to Texas. I'm not going to send my kid to school in Texas. What do you tell people about living in Texas?
Well, in a very real way, I'll make it very personal. I have 2 amazing stepdaughters, 19 and 14. So the 19-year-old is in college, and the 14-year-old, we just put her back in public school in Plano. She's doing a very special pilot program called the Wildcat Collegiate Academy, where she'll actually graduate with an associate's from Collin College at the same time she graduates. So we feel like that's good for her. But then we've got, my 2 spawn, right? The 5-year-old and the 2-year-old. And we're really trying to figure out what is best for them, because it's so interesting that people, and I don't feel persecuted by this. It's just, I feel so happy and blessed with the way that I was created. So I don't have any problem with it. But there are very different circumstances. When we were looking for pediatricians, and it's why my wife Kimberly first formed her nonprofit Rainbow Roundup for LGBTQ families, is we're not just looking for a great pediatrician. We want to be someplace where they're going to be accepting of our family. Like, the last thing I want to deal with is my kid or us dealing with anything where they've got issues or they treat us differently or and all of that. So there's always these extra expectations of what we have to look for. And right now, I don't have to tell anybody, looking at what's going on in schools, I'm not against religion. I just want to make sure my kids are going to be guided the way that we see fit. And so we're right now really exploring schools in particular for our 5-year-old, and then the 2-year-old will be a part of this, because we're not sure that public school is necessarily the best. And that pains me to say. I'm a proud Plano Senior High Wildcat, and it does pain me. But between book bannings and allowing the Bible to be taught and also class size. That's a big issue for me, but not necessarily relevant with the time, with the age and time that we're in. But those are things that we're thinking about. It's beyond the best academics. It's about a safe space for your kids. And that, to me, that's the most important job I have right now. And I know that's how a lot of people are feeling. So I do understand the concerns that come into place. But, you know, we're in Dallas. We're not in Lubbock or Midland, and not to put those places down, but it's just, there are pockets of places where you can find community here. I don't know what it would be like in a more rural or less populated place. I only know what the people who are there tell me, because they're coming to our law firm for a reason, as opposed to a local law firm there. But I think that, you know, there are places in Texas, and the people in Texas, I think, are wonderful. I'm not originally from Texas, but when I moved to DC, I graduated high school here in Texas. I went to law school I went to college in San Antonio, and then I moved away, and I never thought I'd come back. But through different circumstances, I came back after being away, and I understand the pride of Texans. You know, they are friendly, good people. I ran for United States Congress, by the way, in 2018. I block walked. I talked to people, and I know what our legislators look like. I know what our elected leaders look like. But I'm telling you, the people are good, kind, compassionate people that are just trying to do the right thing. They want to feel seen and valued, and they want their beliefs to feel validated. But I think, you know, we could get into a political conversation, but in general, the people that we encounter, the Texans, whether they're transplants like us or whether they have been born and raised here, that really is. It's funny because when you drive into Texas, there's a sign that says drive friendly the Texas way. In my opinion, that's the only thing that's not friendly about Texans is driving here is terrible. But there really is walking into a store and people saying, hey, how are you doing today? That does not happen in Washington, D.C. Let me just tell you that right now. And so I think if we try to focus on the best of us and not just interpret everything through the lens of discrimination and the current times, that we'll be able to navigate this, and we're going to be able to see the best in people and bring out the best in people.
So as you look forward into the future and you don't have your crystal ball,
right?
What do you see on the landscape?
I don't know if you're a Good Place fan. If you've watched the show, The Good Place, you need to watch this because what I'm about to explain to you will not make any sense to you. But basically, The Good Place is about the afterlife, and it's a comedy. I highly recommend it. But they talk about at some point in the show about the space-time continuum and how it's not necessarily linear. They call it Jeremy Bear Me, and so it's kind of cursive Jeremy Bear Me and all of that. So my position is that I love the quote by MLK that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends towards justice. And I do believe that. I don't know that it's a linear arc. I think it's more like a Jeremy Bear Me. Okay. But we are in one place in time. And I try to think of the bigger picture and really, frankly, my opinion, not be so self-absorbed that I would rather live in this time than 30 years ago, than 50. I mean, I did live 30 years ago, but you know what I'm saying as an adult, 50, 100, 2,000 years ago. And you know what? If we can just do what we can to advance it forward so that somebody 50 or 100 years from now is saying, I would never want to live in 2024, then we're doing the right thing. And I try to see it from a bigger perspective of what can we do in this time that we were plopped in, be appreciative of the things that we have that we didn't have before. I would have never have conceived of marriage equality in 2005 when I moved back to Texas and started my practice. Yeah. How wonderful is that? Now it could be taken away. So let's fight not to. And if we do, let's fight to get it back. And you just keep going. You just keep having hope. You keep doing hard things. That's what makes us Americans. That's what makes us Texans.
I love it. And in the meantime, get your legal documents.
In the meantime,
right?
What you can control.
What you can control. And that's something that's so important.
Yeah.
I always think there's so much to be anxious over. But there's also so much you have no control over, and the things that you do have control over, you take action on that.
Absolutely. And I think you can't discount the emotional and mental comfort that it gives to you to feel like you have this in place. It may change, it may update. I know we could go through 100 reasons as to why people put this off, but part of it is, they don't know what it's going to look like in 5 years or 10 years. But you know what? If something happens in the meantime, have what it looks like right now. Yeah. And you probably don't even realize until you do it how that does bring you some peace.
Absolutely. Lorie, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us today and helping us enlighten us a little bit along the way. And if you want to learn more about Lorie and her practice, and especially you want to CYA your assets,
that's right.
We're going to include a link to her website where you can reach out and contact her. We hope that you'll continue to follow along and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.